Okay, welcome to breakout room number 2. This breakout room is focused on 3 topics, one being aquatic and riparian habitat, another being long-term funding, and then finally water quality. So we're going to be taking questions and comments there. A couple of just housekeeping things. I want you to know that we are recording this just so that we can post this on the public website, and those individuals that were unable to attend or attending a different room can come back and take a look at this at their leisure. We, at this point, I'll introduce myself, go over a couple of bookkeeping things, and then we'll get started. So I'm Brian Metzke. I'm an aquatic ecologist with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and the author of the Aquatic and Riparian Habitat section. I'm joined by Christine Davis from the EPA, and she's going to be helping us with the other 2 sections and answering questions and taking comments from those. We have about 40 minutes, so at 10:50, we'll be adjourning, stopping this room so that we can rejoin the primary room for a debrief on those things. As we're going through this, if you would please mute yourself until you're ready to speak, just so that we don't get any feedback or anything like that, and that way everybody can clearly hear. The purpose of this particular breakout room is to get your comments and questions on the recommendation sections of these 3 critical issues of the state water plan. And what would be most useful for us, I think, is just hearing different perspectives, hearing ideas on what sort of recommendations that you see as important for these 3 critical issue topics. Again, these documents are in various states of draft format. So although committees have met and started to build together recommendations, there's plenty of time to incorporate new perspective and new recommendations as well. So again, this will be partly informative, but also to receive your feedback on those recommendations. There, if you haven't seen it already, is a pre-recorded slideshow on the main State Water Plan Task Force webpage that goes over the recommendations of each of these critical issues sections. So if you haven't seen that, they're about 2 minutes per critical issue, so the total slideshow is about 30 minutes long. So I do encourage you to see that. So I think at this time, what I'll do is go ahead and open it up for questions and comments. If you need any additional information on the plan, please let me know. I'll try to answer those as best as we can. But I would love to hear your comments and recommendations for each of these 3 topics, and so we can get your perspectives and work them into the plan. Again, just so you know where we are in terms of the overall document process here, like I said, we've had a number of public meetings now. This public meeting is focused on kind of squaring out the recommendations section. And the target audience for this document altogether are those people that are involved in crafting laws and policies dealing with water issues. So that could be the governor's office, the General Assembly, director's offices of the pertinent agencies, and even farther down an administrative level of these agencies. So that's really what we're going for. We're trying to be broad with our recommendations, but also a little bit flexible too, because this document should have at least a 10-year shelf life on it, so we can't necessarily know all of the future scenarios that may occur in water topics. So we're trying to be a little bit flexible there. So I'll just open this up. If anyone has any questions or comments, please let those be known. We have about 30 minutes to discuss here. So let's go ahead and get started. Don't be shy, and just unmute yourself and let us know if you have some issues you'd like to discuss.
Hi, it's Alec Davis with the Illinois Environmental Regulatory Group. I have a question on the water quality topic. So this may be for Christine, but one of the aspects of water quality that I've been paying attention to for a number of years has to do with the agency's impaired waters list that they put out every, I think, other year. And there are a number of impaired waters on that list that point back to sampling or studies that are many years old as the basis of the impairment. And so I kind of wondered whether there might be an opportunity in the task force report to prioritize looking at some of the data that might be old data and evaluating whether there may be opportunities to go back and revisit some of these waters that haven't been looked at in a while and see if the conditions are still as they were back when that data was originally collected.
Good morning, and thank you for that comment. I agree with your comment totally. We do have some very historic data and not a lot of recent data for much of the state. Illinois Environmental Protection Agency has been working on an update to the next 5-year monitoring strategy. And on a positive note, we've been able to rehire a number of staff to go ahead and start to make a difference there. But it would be appropriate to make sure that we have not only the update to the non-point source, but the monitoring strategy, but then also making sure that it gets implemented as recommended and expanded as needed as well. Thank you.
I had 2 questions. The first is that I think for me at least, the links for breakout session 2 and breakout session 3 seem to be the same coming in from the water plan page. So regardless of which one I clicked on, I ended up in this meeting. I don't know if anybody else experienced that as well. And then I just wanted to follow up on the water quality question. Right now, there are no recommendations for the water quality subcommittee. Is that correct?
I'm sorry to say, but I honestly don't know the answer to that. We, the staff person that had been the main lead on working with the water plan retired at the end of the year. The newer person that was given responsibility took his position not far from that. So we're going to have to go back and research that.
Okay. So is there an expectation that there will be a water quality portion of the final plan?
I believe so, yes. We've got, we've just recently had conversations that we're going to regroup within the Bureau of Water at Illinois EPA and reestablish what we need to do to move this forward, because this is an opportunity that we can't pass up.
So I'll take a moment and, thank you for that question. It does bring up one additional thing I'd like to point out, which is, again, these sections are in various states of draft form. Later this fall, the entire draft document will be produced for public consumption and comment. And there is a date set, I believe, of November 17th. For a live public comment period such as this, or perhaps it'll be in person, for comments on that entire draft document. So sometime in October, I would imagine that draft document will be finalized, and there'll be a period of time in which the public can view the entire document and then make public comments as needed. And then those will be incorporated into the document, which is set for completion by the end of the year.
Hey, Brian, I just wanted to check just to make sure that I'm understanding right. So there will be a draft of the entire plan available by October, or just a draft of the recommendations available by October?
The entire plan. So as committee members, we've been asked to, complete our entire sections by the fall. And so that can be put together into one, comprehensive draft report, state water plan report, that will be available for the public to view. I would imagine it's going to be distributed on our website. And then there'll be some period of weeks which the public can consume that and consider it, and then make comments by, I believe, that November 17th deadline.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, hey, this is Nick Longbucko. So I was looking on I think the state water plan, what is this? TF presentation outreach or phase 2. So is the water quality not have its own slide? Like, seems like every other, is that what we're kind of talking about here? Because like
Yeah,
climate change and all the
so-
other 13 topics seem to have its own slide. And I was trying to, but water quality doesn't seem to, unless that's not the latest document I
no,
should be
you're-
looking at.
Yeah, you're
This is
correct in that
Chris-
observation. Mhm.
Yeah, this is Chris Davis. That was a gap from Illinois EPA.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Again, if you're not familiar with the kind of status and structure of the plan, that slideshow that's on the task force website is an excellent view. If you haven't done that prior to this meeting, that can provide you with the basic information about these draft recommendations and where we believe each section is going.
Hey, sorry, this is Ayana Simba again. I had to step away for the initial intro, but this breakout room is covering long-term planning and aquatic riparian habitat as well, right? Are we able to ask questions about that now, or are we going in a specific order?
No, you can ask questions about any of those 3 sections. Yeah, go right ahead. We have some for those other sections.
Okay. Does the aquatic riparian or the long-term funding, do either of them have draft recommendations as of now?
Yes. So the aquatic and riparian habitat does. Yeah, and I can go over those briefly if that would be helpful for you. Just in maybe 1 minute kind of overview, if that's useful for you right now.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
So we've been asked, to produce the task ahead of us for each of the committees was to produce a small number, approximately 3 categories of recommendations. And so we did that as part of the Aquatic and Riparian Habitat Committee. Our first recommendation is to enhance and protect the aquatic and riparian habitat structure and processes. And so within that kind of broad recommendation, we have a couple of actionable items. For instance, to expand existing best management practice incentive programs and to develop new incentive programs that target additional types of land, say urban flood zones. We also discussed using existing designation sort of procedures. An example is Class 3 groundwater designation to fully implement those sorts of programs that exist but are really underutilized. So those are a couple of examples. The second category of recommendations is to improve aquatic and riparian habitat data coverage, resolution, and integration. So although we do collect, the various agencies within the state collect a large volume of data from anything from, biological data to chemical and physical data, it's at a really low resolution, both in space and time. So we make a few actionable item considerations for improving that resolution and also expanding the types of taxonomic groups that are, and physical and chemical parameters that are collected during this data collection processes. And finally, the last category of recommendation is to prioritize aquatic and riparian habitat in state policy and law. And as you know, in Illinois, the private use of water and riparian habitats is really kind of emphasized. And we want to move that needle a little bit more towards protection and public use as well. So a couple of examples in there are to, try to identify additional waters within the state that qualify as public waters. So there's a program that has some regulatory weight behind it, but really is probably underutilized. So we can use something that already exists and try to expand it. We could also try to look for additional funding mechanisms that will help with conservation and enhancement of existing riparian and aquatic habitat. So those are just a few of the kind of, those are the categories of recommendations, and then a few of the actionable items under each of those recommendations.
Thanks, Brian.
But,
Are those recommendations available on the website too?
yeah, so if you view that pre-recorded website, you can see those like broad categories of recommendations and kind of, again, a 2-minute introduction to that section. But if you would like to see more, participate in a more detailed way, you're always free to contact me, and we'll get in touch, after this meeting and discuss a little bit more detail on how that particular section is going.
Got it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
I will say. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. In terms of the aquatic and riparian habitat, and I don't know if this needs to be its own recommendation or can be integrated into one of them. If you look at the work that I think the Nature Conservancy has done with resilient and connected landscapes, which is looking at climate adaptation long term for communities, whether plant or animal, the river corridors and a landscape like the Midwest, where there's so much transformed land, are very important for climate adaptation, as things might have to move up to different latitudes. So I don't know how that can be integrated, but they're developing some pretty good GIS tools that can kind of say where the important parts of the landscape are important for climate resiliency. And I bet I would imagine river corridors in Illinois will be important for that.
I want to make sure I recorded that correctly, Nick. You said work that's called the Resilient and Connected Landscapes. Did I record that correctly?
Yeah, here, can I just post a link?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Resilient connected landscapes, yes.
Yes, climate change is something, it has its own section, so it has been identified as a critical issue and will have its own section within the plan. However, I will say that, climate change permeates all of the sections and will be discussed, at least in limited detail, in the aquatic and riparian habitat section. However, I think, for the most part, the strategy is, although to incorporate in each section, to not go into great detail with each of the subsections, with, of course, the exception of the climate change section itself. We've been given the task as committees to try to keep each of these sections down to something around the range of 3 pages. And again, that has to do with the strategy of who the target audience is. And we don't want to overwhelm the state legislature, the governor's office with long sections on each of these, but rather this plan be a jumping off point to say, we've identified these problems and made these recommendations. Now, how do we turn these recommendations into something very actionable. And that's where the kind of plan leaves off there. So it really is a synthesis of each of these topics rather than, I don't know, a very detailed guide, if you will, for solving these problems.
I guess one other for aquatic and riparian habitat is, I guess under the recommendations to enhance or improvement, like when will it, is that, I guess when we do the deep dive into that, is that a time to think about like reconnecting a lot of the floodplain to the channel where especially streams have been in size and there's just a big separation there?
Right. So one of our, kind of actionable items under our first recommendation is to, we just call it improve connectivity, both longitudinal and lateral within our waters, to enhance both dispersal of biota, but also to improve these natural processes that are either been degraded or just non-existent. So that can include anything from like removing barriers, in-stream barriers, to improving connection to floodplains of these waters, to do exactly what you said, which is to improve the resilience of these systems.
Well, if no one minds, I'd like to go back to maybe the water quality. And just I guess a maybe potential recommendation is just getting a feel for all the drainage net, just the leaky what's it, characteristics of like the extensive drainage network that's in agricultural lands. I guess I don't know if trying to get a handle on how extensive they are, or maybe they're just general impacts. But we have the Illinois nutrient reduction strategy, and the extensive drainage we have on that definitely makes that system even more leakier in terms of these nitrates.
So are you speaking both of drainage districts and then individual agricultural
Yes. Yes.
drainage systems as well? Okay.
And I just don't know like what the conversations of water quality have been, or are we just starting those now as far as setting goals and recommendations that I see these other categories have?
I know that there were some recommendations made earlier in the last calendar year as some of the committee was working together, but I don't have access to what those are. And unfortunately, the slide wasn't put together to share with the public on that. So, but we can definitely add your comments to that. Thank you.
And so, Nick, did you have like a specific recommendation or action that you wanted us to consider, or just ensure that this topic is discussed because it's such an important topic for, like you said, nutrient loss into our
I don't. I'll have to think about that and maybe get it better articulated before I guess I was a little more thinking out loud and then realized didn't know where I was going with that exactly yet. And I don't know if anyone's considered looking into, like the water quality trading or like the water market aspects of that. I guess I don't know if that probably wouldn't go under water use laws and regulations. So if it's going to be considered anywhere, it might have to be under water quality. just how to, better optimize nutrient reductions of, point source compared to not point source, and if there's some market solutions for that.
And so is there an example of that type of market somewhere in the United States that we could draw
Sure.
upon?
I was developing a nutrient reduction exchange. Right now, it's just tracking voluntary practices from non-point sources, but it's piloting in Dubuque and in Cedar Rapids and somewhere else, working with the cities, so they can potentially the improvements they have to make in the cities, trying to offset those with stuff in the watershed. Um, and then I know Wisconsin has their own like offset laws that are codified, and then Ohio has one. I don't know how successful that is, but Wisconsin is more phosphorus based, phosphorus offset credits, I believe. So nearby states do have frameworks for this kind of thing.
And so I'm very curious about this. Could you give us a very specific example of how, say, in an agricultural landscape, a market might look in terms of exchanging nutrient inputs?
Ooh, yeah, that's sometimes it's tied to specific watersheds, sometimes not. But if a facility, water treatment plant, or pollution treatment plant has to, reach this reduction goal, they may be at their technical limit. So obviously, instead of investing in really, really expensive technology, they'll just say, we need someone with, they prefer structural practices. So like wetlands or some other structural practice that can be documented to take out N so many pounds of N or P, and that would generate a credit that point source could purchase, and that would count, against their permit. I don't have any like specific stuff, but I know
No, I think
people that can provide that.
that's really, I think that explanation, is what I was looking for, something general like that. But that explains it much better. Yeah, that's a very interesting idea.
Going back to riparian or aquatic and riparian, as well as water quality, I've noticed that Illinois' draft state forest action plan and potentially the wildlife action plan include some goals for reforestation of marginal agricultural land, which may often be located in riparian areas. And I wonder whether that's something you'd looked at and considered any possible synergy between the various agencies' plans.
Sure. So, I will say that, so I am also the leader of the Streams campaign within the Wildlife Action Plan. And of course, we do have some goals there related to, riparian buffers and whatnot. Unfortunately, those campaigns work a bit independently of one another. And so there's not a lot of communication, say, between the Forest Campaign and the Streams campaign or the Wildlife Action Plan. But I like, discussing that synergy there, and I'm going to make a note of such. We have about 5 minutes remaining before I'm going to asked us to rejoin the main room for the debrief. So if you have any comments, take them now.
I guess I do have one more for water quality. I think a lot of the problem with trying to secure, and maybe again, this might be under long-term funding, but a lot of the problem of securing funding for water quality is it's, I think, hard for us, especially with non-point source solutions, to quantify like the damages of of not having good quality water can do, whether that's recreation or wells becoming not viable, or cities have to expanding their treatment or new sources because, again, the water quality is not adequate. But at least having something to capture that, to kind of make the economic argument that we need to address, I guess, non-point source in particular, maybe should be considered. But that, I don't know if that should, again, number 4, long-term funding, is that just funding for all this stuff, or what is? I kind of zoomed back out on you as far as topics. As I was talking, I saw there was a long-term funding.
So Nick, I think the answer to that is funding for the recommendations within the action plan. So this could be, funding for many of these topics that you've discussed here, either for, that need direct funding or require education and outreach sorts of funding as well. But all these ideas and many of the recommendations within the plan take some money to implement one way or the other. And so it's great to discuss them, but ultimately we need to identify ways of funding those, whether it be, through the General Assembly, assigning funds, or for user fees, or for collaborating with, independent groups that might have funding mechanisms. So I think that's where that topic is headed. So I'll give you an example. You just talked about, developing this economic framework for the costs of, poor water quality, for instance. That could be a study or a working group or something like that. And that would require funding through one mechanism or the other, even if it is just a limited study. And so that, I think, is what that particular critical issue we'll be discussing.
And this is Chris on the issue of long-term funding. And again, we'll go back and try to find the notes that were done by the committee prior to this. Who's responsible for the long-term funding is of much interest, because we have a lot of people reaching out to the different agencies asking for assistance on everything from drinking water support to wastewater treatment support to the protection of the rivers, lakes, and streams, and who gets the priority for the funding. So like the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy, where they came from the angle of helping the people in the state to understand how they were going to be able to save money and implement the practices to their own benefit while also benefiting the state, is a very innovative way of dealing with an issue of finance in a state that doesn't have any finances available to it. So when we're talking about trying to reach out and assist communities that are on our environmental justice list, and even some of our communities that aren't, we start the conversation with them talking about what they need immediately, but then the concept of operation and maintenance on how whatever any state or federal or local sponsor might be able to help them with, how long is that actually going to be of benefit? So we really have to not only look at what resources the state, local, and federal partners might be able to bring to place, but also programs that are going to help with technical assistance so that the communities or the individuals don't have to come back and ask for the assistance again, because they've determined that the actions that they can take are the correct ones, and can take over ownership and responsibility for the pieces that they're responsible for. And then when you talk about responsibility, who's responsible for things when we don't have a strong monitoring program and the data available, and things change by the amount of rainfall that you've had between, you know, a one-time event versus a yearly time span, it makes for some interesting conversations, and we spend a lot of time talking about who's causing the problem instead of how to fix the problem and how to move forward, so.
Okay. I want to thank everyone for participating in this room. And like I said, I'll give a brief overview of what we discussed to the whole group here in a couple minutes. So if you would, I'm going to shut down this room, and then please go back to the original, so labeled as room 1 or the introductory room. Join us back there and we'll get a brief synopsis of each of the rooms there and some further details on where the plan is headed and some important dates. Thank you, everybody.